All right, I will say good morning. Everyone hear me on Zoom all right? Excellent. So, started in just a moment. All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. So, the YouTube is on. It's good. Okay. So first of all, hopefully everybody had a beautiful, uplifting, and meaningful Yom Kippur. A Gutiyar, a Piskatava to everyone. It's an incredible schos to be able to continue in the new year, in the new Masech. So I will say today we pick up on Daf Nun Aleph. We're actually picking up from Nun Amud Beis 50b at the two dots, 2 lines up from the bottom. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Steve and Terry Zinn, in memory of their parents, Tzvi Hirsch ben Yosef HaKohen, Yentel Mindel Bas David Halevi, Bunim Tzvi ben Chaim, and Devora Bas Yisrael Yoel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah, and the families in Nechama. And also with that, let us begin. So we're actually picking up with a quote from the Mishnah, the last 2 lines of Nun Amud Beis. Amar Shvisasi bi'ikaro mahalech mimakum raglo va'adikar al-paim amo. Umeikaro lebeso al-paim amo nimtza mahalech meshech hashecha dalit al-paim amo. So let's remember again, already continuing from yesterday's daf, the Gemara is fixated, and understandably so, as it was the last Mishnah that we dealt with the interesting situation or the interesting ability. I'm sorry, let me just find the Mishnah. Where was the Mishnah? Good. No, that's not the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah was talking about, here, sorry, Mem Testament base. So Rabbi says, remember against the Mishnah was talking about an area somewhere within 2,000 amos of your current location. That was also 2,000 amos from your home. Now the beauty of that is this way you'd be able to travel effectively 4,000 amos over the course of Shabbos. So remember again, Rabbi say, what we've been focusing on over here is so now the Gemara is going to focus on this last piece. The Gemara says, the Gemara is going to quote the Mishnah, and the Mishnah now is going to discuss the parameters of this halacha. Who could take advantage of a situation like this? So for example, the Gemara says, V'zohi sha'amru ha'ani ma'arev b'raglov. Says, actually, let's read the Gemara. So top of Nun Aleph. Amar Rava. So Rava says, when is this so? When does this work? That halacha l'maisa you could establish a forward makom shvisa. V'hudich yirayit le'ikaro mati. This is only assuming that if halacha l'maisa you were to run to that forward makom shvisa, that you would be able to make it. So also, there's a very important, Rav is coming along and giving a very important qualification. So the Mishnah says that I could be in location A, and I know of a specific landmark. Remember, again, based on yesterday's daf, you can't talk in a general location. You have to specifically identify a place, a specific Dalit Amos area. I identify Dalit Amos area somewhere within 2,000 Amos of my current location, and that becomes my new Makom Shvisa for Shabbos, and then have 2,000 Amos from that forward location. Rava says you have to be able to potentially reach that forward Makom Shvisa before Shabbos. That's the lashon over here. V'hu d'chi rohit li karo mati. That's assuming that if you were to run right now, you would reach the base of the tree. He's just using tree as an example, but of course tree is non-specific. The idea is, according to Rava, halacha l'maaseh, you have to have the ability to reach that makom shvisa, even if it means through running before Shabbos. I both say, Rava's not saying you have to get there. Rav is just saying you have to have the potential to get there. Amrli Abaye says, one second, katani. So we'll say, but one second, but the Mishnah seems to indicate that already this is late on Erev Shabbos, and bepashtos, that there's an inability to reach. In others, we'll say, isn't the whole novelty in this whole thing that you could establish a makom shvisa that you can't reach on Erev Shabbos. No. Chashcha leveso aval liikaro shel ilan matzi azal. No. So therefore, Rava will say, no. What it means is it's too late on Erev Shabbos for you to reach your final destination, your home, right? But it's not too late to reach the forward makom shvisa. An alternate version of this, Amar Rava chashchalo, if it's getting dark, kimaski kali kali. So we'll say when the Mishnah says that it's too dark to reach your forward makom shvisa, that's if you walk slowly. Aval rohit, ultimately again, but if you were to run, mati, you would be able to go ahead and reach your forward makom shvisa. So we'll say, so Rav is coming along and giving a very important qualification that halacha l'maisa, in order to establish a forward makom shvisa, it only works if halacha l'maisa, you could reach that forward makom shvisa by running. Now again, so it doesn't have to be that it's close enough that you could just reach it through a nice leisurely pace. But even if you could technically run and get there, that's a proper makom shvisa. And I will say, interestingly enough, the Shulchan Aruch in fact codifies this lahalacha. And the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. This actually, I'm going to save this sif. This is in Siman Tov Tes Sif Yud Aleph. So the truth is, I'm gonna save this for the end of the shir, because actually this sif is going to cover a number of different halachas that we're going to see. But we're going to see that in fact Rava's statement is accepted halacha l'maisa, that the establishment of a forward makom shvisa only works if halacha l'maisa you are able to potentially reach it before Shabbos. Now again, you don't have to reach it, but the potential to reach it must be there. Another interesting case. Rabbi and Rav Yosef were traveling on the road on Erev Shabbos. Amalei Rabba Rav Yosef, Tehei Shavisa Seinu Tusi Dikla de Sabi Lachua. Let our makom shvisa be underneath the palm tree that rests against its brother. So apparently, again, there were these two palm trees, one that rested against the other. They were well-known landmarks. So Rabbi says to Rav Yosef, let's establish a forward makom shvisa. So the Gemara says, Va'amarle, others say, Tu say dikla de parak mari mikarga. Let our forward makom shvisa be underneath the palm tree that exempts its master from tax. Which I will say, this wasn't like a tax-exempt tree. What he was saying was, it was a tree that produced so much produce. Look, if you look at Rashi. Rashi is the parak mari mikarga, toin peres harbe. It brings forth a lot of fruit. Umochran upore mehenamas. So ultimately, again, it brings forth a lot of fruit, and ultimately, you're able to go ahead and pay it off. And pay off your taxes. So the idea was like the name of the tree is actually not so important over here. The point over here is that Rabbi was saying to Rav Yosef, we're traveling. We want to establish a forward makom shvisa. I'm identifying a specific tree that should serve as our makom shvisa. Yodalei mar. So Rabbi says to Rav Yosef, do you know that tree? Amar le lo yidanale. Rav Yosef said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Amar le samochalai. It was incredible. So Rabbi said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just rely on me. Rely on me. In other words, I'll establish the forward makom shvisa for both of us. This sanya, because we learned Rabbi Yossi Omerim Hayushnayim Echad Makir ve'Echad Sheno Makir. If two people are traveling on Erev Shabbos, one recognizes, one knows of a forward landmark that could be used as a makom shvisa, and one does not. Zeh She'eno Makir, the one who does not recognize, or as we'll say, so the one who is unaware of a landmark that could serve as a forward makom shvisa. Moser shvisaso lemakir. He gives over his ability to establish a makom shvisa to the one who does recognize. V'zeh shemakir, and the one who is aware of the forward makom shvisa. Omer tehei shvisasenu b'makom ploni. He could establish the makom shvisa on behalf of both of them. So we'll say an incredible halacha. Namely, again, that if two people are traveling, one recognizes a forward landmark that could serve as a makom shvisa, the other one does not. The one who does not could give over his makom shvisa making ability to the one who does, and the one who does could establish a proper makom shvisa on behalf of both individuals. We'll say, what an incredible musar. This is why in life it's good to align yourself with people who know where they're going in life. Because at the end of the day, even if you don't know where you're going, at least you could have a chaver who does know where he's going, and he could help you along your own personal journey. And really an incredible musar. So the Gemara says, Velohi. So first of all, I will say, this is interesting. The Gemara attributed the position to Rabbi Yossi. So the halach is correct, But velohi lo tana like Rabbi Yossi. In fact, this halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi. Ella ki hechi de lekabel le minei. Rather, I will say, interestingly enough, this is very fascinating. They just said the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi in order that people will accept the halacha. Mishum de Rabbi Yossi nimuko imo, because also Rabbi Yossi was very thorough in all of his halachic rulings, and everyone knows whenever you see Rabbi Yossi, the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say it could very well be that the Brisa, in fact, bless you, if Brisa in fact does not follow the Brisa is not actually a statement of Rabbi Yossi, but rather was attributed to Rabbi Yossi in order that ultimately, again, it should have a following. And obviously we're going to see that is also accepted halacha l'maisa. So I'm just pointing out to you these little morsels of halacha l'maisa. So first, Rava's statement that you have to be able to reach the forward makom shvisa. Halacha number 2, that if two people are traveling together and one doesn't know a forward makom shvisa, but the other one does not, the one who does not could rely on the one who does, and the one who does could establish a forward makom shvisa for both individuals. Good. Im eno makir o she'eno baki. Shabbos says, remember again, the Mishnah said, if someone doesn't know about the concept of establishing a forward makom shvisa, or someone's just not the baki with halacha, so I'm sorry, someone doesn't know the halacha, or someone just doesn't know a forward landmark. In other words, Shabbos, remember again, as we've established many times over, in order to go ahead and create a forward makom shvisa, you must be able to identify a specific landmark. If you don't know that, or you just don't know the halacha, so what do? You establish your makom shvisa, your domicile, where you are, and you have 2,000 amos from there. So listen to this. The Gemara says, by the way, hani al payim amahechan ksivan. From where do we know the halacha of 2,000 amos? I'll say, isn't it incredible? I just want to say, so we've been learning this Masechta, right? This is now the 51st day, right, in Eruvin. And we've been learning about Tchum for a very long time. The Gemara says, by the way, where do you learn Tchum from? Where do you know 2,000 amos for Tchum? We'll say, there's an incredible mussar in this. You ever wonder to yourself, why does the Gemara structure it like this? Right? At the end of the day, so again, this Gemara should actually be the first Gemara we learn in Tchumen. Because it's an incredible, I think Chazal are teaching us an incredible insight into what it means to be a Jew. To what it means to be a Jew is, I do. HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks me, Chazal asks me, the Shulchan Aruch asks me, so I do. Of course, after I do, then I try to understand why. But lest you think for a moment that the performance is predicated on understanding, that's never the case. The performance is predicated on the fact that I have the schus to be an Eved Hashem. I have the privilege of being a servant, of being a soldier, of being a son of the Ribono Shel Olam. And because of that, whatever my Father asks of me, I'm going to do. Of course, once I'm doing it and I'm dedicated and I'm committed, then I have the ability to explore the whys. So hani alpaim amahechan ksivan. So by the way, so where do you know 2,000 amos from? The Sanya Shvu Ish Tachtov. So it's actually quite fascinating. So the pasuk says every person should remain in his place. Right? So remember again, the pasuk over here is Ru'u ki Hashem nasan lachem on Shabbos, al kinu nosin lechem yom shishi lechem yomayim. So we'll say this pasuk is actually talking about the man, and so about the fact that on Friday you got a double portion of man, and therefore as a result Moshe Rabbeinu says Shavu ish tachtov, everyone stay in their place. Al yetze ish mimkomo b'yom Shabbos b'yom Shvi. Don't go out of your place on the seventh day. Shvu ish tachtov. Every person should remain where he is. So we'll say, so Shvu Ish Tachtov, the Gemara says, Eilu Arba Amos. This refers to Dalar Amos. So that's Shvu Ish Tachtov, which we'll say, interesting, literally means what? Literally means like, how would you literally translate that? Sit underneath you. So the underneath, that's my makom, that's Dalar Amos. That teaches me, I will say, that wherever I go in life, I always acquire like a little mini Rishus HaYachid. That Rishus HaYachid is my Dalar Amos around me. So the Gemara says, Al Yetzi Ish Mimkomo, but when it says that a person should not leave his place, Elu Alpayim Amo. This refers to the 2,000 amos. So we'll say this is a fascinating drasha. So part one of the drasha is Shvu Ish Tachtov, that's your Dalar Amos. Al Yetzi Ish Mimkomo, that's your 2,000 amos tchum. So the Gemara says, okay, but Elu alpaim minolan. We'll say, that's not answering my question. So what I could get from this pasuk is what? From the pasuk, I could glean the fact that there are like two different reshuyos. right? Two different reshuyos. So there's a reshus, there's a dalet amis reshus, and there's some larger. Because remember again, the pasuk itself uses two different phrases: shavu ish tachtov and al yetze ish mimkomo. So shavu ish tachtov, you're telling me is what? Dalet amis. Al yetze ish mimkomo, you're telling me is what? 2,000 amis. But where do you get that it's 2,000 amas? Where do you get that from? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda will say this is interesting. So it's actually it's a much longer Gzeira Shava. Amar Rav Chisda, Lamadnu makom mimakom, makom minisa, nisa minisa, nisa migvul, gvul migvul, ugvul michutz, vichutz michutz. So we'll say, interestingly enough, This is one of these fascinating Gezeira Shavas that span multiple psukim. If you look at Rashi, we're not going to go through. Rashi says over here, makom minisa, pasuk shene'emar bo makom lo ne'emar bo nisa, danino somi pasuk acher shene'emar bo makom vinisa, kegon al yetze ish mimkomo, danin mi v'samti lecha makom asher yanu shama. So suffice it to say, we're going to see that it's a Gezeira Shava between Shabbos, Ir miklat, v'hadar danin nisa minisa migvul, klamar danin nisa shelo ne'amar bo gvul, minisa shelo ne'amar bo gvul, they say migvul ir miklato, umar bina le be'idach, so what we're going to see, it's Shabbos to ir miklat to ir leviim ultimately again back to Shabbos. So we'll say, so that's, now I want to point out, remember, we'll say we paskin that the concept of tchumin is dirabanan. So that's why, again, you could have a little bit more of a convoluted Gezeira Shava. Again, obviously, there are opinions who hold that it's a Doraisa, and the Doraisa would be based on this Gezeira Shava. So we'll say, but listen to this, skip to the end of the Gezeira Shava. Ugvul michutz, v'chutz michutz. And we'll say, at the end of the day, we make a Gezeira Shava of chutz. It's chutz by Ir Miklat, and chutz ultimately, again, by Arei Halavim, Levitic cities. So we'll say, so essentially, we're going from Shabbos to Ir Miklat to Ir Miklat itself, two within Ir Miklat, then Ir Miklat to Ar Levim, and then Ar Levim, circle it back to Shabbos. And what does it say about Ar Levim? It says, Dichsev umadosem michutz la'ir es pa'as kedma al payim amo. Oh, I will say, what does it say by the Ar Levim? So the Ar Levim have 2,000 amas boundary. They have 2,000, boundary is the wrong word, 2,000 amas, the right word is, we'll call boundary, another boundary to the city. Oh, so we'll say, so what do you see from here? So again, when you take that whole prolonged Gezeira Shava, that leads you ultimately again to chutz. Just like Ar Levim have 2,000 amas on the outskirts of the city, so too again, Tchum is 2,000 amas. I v'nelif mekir ha'ir v'chutza elef ama. But 1 second, I will say, there's another pasuk. The pasuk, remember, by the Arei Halavim, the 2,000 amma boundary, 1,000 amas, could go ahead and be used for farming or for whatever you want. But 1,000 amas must be kept open. Or whatever, unplanted. I'll call it vacant. Right? You can't do anything on it. So why don't you learn out chutza, and say just like 1,000 amas of the Levitic city has to be vacant, so too Tchum is not 2,000 amas, but rather what? It's 1,000 amas. To which the Gemara says, no. Danin chutz mi chutz, ve'in danin chutz mi chutza. Because Rabbi said with the Gezeira Shava, from the Ir Miklat, we have the word chutz by Ir Miklat and chutz by Arei Levim. So we'd rather make a Gezeira Shava of chutz than chutza. Chutza. So the Gemara says, 1 second, who cares? I don't say, why can't you make a Gezeira Shava of chutza? After all, Hatchan di Rabbi Yishmael, B'Shava Kohen, Ubaha Kohen, Zohi Shiva, Zohi Bia. Rabbi said we have examples of Gezeira Shavas that could be made even with dissimilar words. So Rabbi say this happens to be talking about over here, Sara'as of the home. And here Rabbi say, the Gemara makes a Gezeira Shava between, very quickly, the idea over here is as follows, that if there is Sara'as of the home, so Rabbi say, so what you do is they close off the home for a week. If halacha l'maisa, the Sara'as did not spread, all you have to do is remove the stones and the surrounding mortar. If the Sara'as, however, again, remained in place or spread a bit, you lock it off for another week. The idea that the Gemara is saying over here is the process for week 1 and the process for week 2 in Sara'as Habayis are the same. How do I know that? That's based on a Gezeira Shava of V'shav HaKohen ubaha kohen. The kohen will return, the kohen will come. So I'll say, what does that teach you? What does that teach you? That you could even make gezeira shavas from dissimilar words. From dissimilar words. So if you can make a gezeira shava from v'shava kohen and ubaha kohen, then what? Certainly you can make a gezeira shava from chutz chutza. And if that's the case, that you make a gezeira shava from chutz chutza, then how do you know that tchum is 2,000 amas? Maybe tchum is only what? 1,000 amas. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Hani mili heicha deleka midi didamile. Aval heicha dika midi didamile midamile afina. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Technically speaking, you could make a gezeira shava from dissimilar words if you have to. If you have to. If you have no similar words, then you can make gezeira shavas from dissimilar words. But when there are similar words, then halacha l'maisa, of course, it is preferable to make the gezeira shava like that. So halacha l'maisa, if I have a choice between making gezeira shava of chutz chutz versus chutz chutza, then halacha l'maisa, I'm going to go with chutz chutz. Shabbos says halacha l'maisa will come. Very important. So therefore, what we learn from here is shvu ish tachtov teaches me what? Daled amas. Daled amas. And al yetze ish min komo teaches me 2,000 amas. But of course, it's not just chutz mim komo, but rather again, as the Gemara says, it's makom, nisa, gvul, chutz, and chutz. That's the progression of the gezeira shava. So bottom line, we call this the gezeira shava of chutz. That's the bottom line. Gezeira shava teaches me 2,000 amas. But also another important piece of Talmudic information. You can make gezeira. There are gezeira shavas. When I say you can make, I will say, you don't just make gezeira shavas. If you have some free time today, you don't decide on some gezeira shavas you'd like to make. Gezeira shavas, of course, are halacha l'Moshe misinai. What the Gemara is saying is that yes, you will sometimes find gezeira shavas that are made from dissimilar words, like you have over here by tzaras habatim, but that's very rare and infrequent. More often than not, gezeira shavas are made from same words. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. Apayim ama agula. So let's say, so remember again, we had another machlokes in the Mishnah. How do you measure the 2,000 amas? How do you measure 2,000 amas? So let's say, so if you remember again, the Gemara said as follows. The Gemara says, apayim ama ruach agulos. So Rabbi Chanina ben Teginis said that when measuring the tchum, you measure it as a 2,000 amma circle. So we'll say, so essentially, it's a circle with a 4,000 amma radius, right? You're in the middle of that circle, and there's a 4,000 amma radius. Chachamim say, no, it's not a circle, but rather it's a square. What's the benefit of measuring it as a square? Is that you're also able to benefit from what? From the corners. From the corners. That's the machlokes. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus manav shach. So I'll say, Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, I don't understand. Why do you say a circle? Why do you say a circle and not a square? I is like gezeira shava peos kasvinon. V'i los like gezeira shava apayim alminos. Well, listen to this. We just got finished saying as follows. From where do we learn out the concept of 2,000 amas? From the cities of the Levium. The Rabbi say, when measuring the Levitic cities, one thing is clear, which is they were measured as a square. They're measured as a square. So the 2,000 amas of the Levitic cities was measured as a square. So I don't understand. So the Maisa, if you're measuring the Levitic cities, if you're learning out Tchum from Ari Halavim, from the Levitic cities, that just as the Levitic cities are a square, so to the Tchum should be a square. And if you're not learning it out of Levitic cities, then what? We have a bigger problem. From where do you know 2,000 amas? To which the Gemara says, the Olam is like gezeira shava. In fact, Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus holds of the gezeira shava. But rather, V'shayni ha'chi damakra, zeh yelachem igrushay ha'arim, la zeh aton osein peos, v'aton osein peos l'shov se Shabbos. So Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus will say, the pasuk itself says, zeh yelachem. This one, meaning it's only Ari Halavim that is squared off. But other times that you use the 2,000 amma measurement, it is not squared off. Rabbanan, Tani Rabbi Chananya Omer, Kazeh Yitnu Kol Shob Seif Shabbos. So we'll say the Rabbanan, in their version have that Rabbi Chananya says, Kazeh you, every time you measure 2,000 amas, every 2,000 amas should always be treated the same way. That halacha l'maisa, a square. So we'll say, it's interestingly enough, the machlokes Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus and the Chachamim is halacha l'maisa, essentially how far you take the limud from Arei Halaviyim. Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus says, we'll take the 2,000 amos from Arei Halaviyim, but not the square, because the square is something kazeh, dafka unique to the Arei Leviyim, whereas the Chum will say, no, we take everything from Arei Leviyim, 2,000 amos as well as the square. Amar Ravacha bar Yaakov. Well, it's an interesting halacha. Hama'avir dalet amos b'rshus harabim. So let's listen to this halacha. If you take something, right, you carry something, dalet amos and b'rshus harabim, eino chayiv ad shema'avir hein va'alachson. Both say, see, now that we got into a discussion about diameter, so the Gemara says something very interesting. In reality, you're only chayiv for carrying dalet amos on Shabbos if you go ahead and you carry it along the diagonal of a square. But I was saying, if you have a dalet by dalet square, the diagonal of that is 5 3/5 amos. So you're actually only chayiv on Shabbos if you carry 5 3/5 amos. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Hein va'alachzon, dalet amos v'cheschum she'ama, da'amrin kazeh yihu kol shov se Shabbos. Peos teilohen, v'gabi ha'avara lekka l'meisa of peos elaki hai gavna. So we'll say, so what's happening over here is as follows. Once we're saying that halacha l'maisa, we're learning out these shiurim from Arei Halaviyim, and Arei Halaviyim tells us, at least according to the Chachamim, that every time you have a shear, we take the diagonal into account as well, right? Because we square it off in order that you have maximum area. The Gemara now is suggesting that you're really only chayiv for carrying something dalet amos on Shabbos if you carry the diagonal of an area of dalet by dalet, 5 3/5 amos. So the Gemara says, Amra Papa, Badik lan Rava, Amud Birshus Harabim Gavua Yud V'Rochav Dalid. So I'll say, so what about the following case? Let's say you have an Amud, a pillar in Rishus Harabim that is 10 amos high, or 10 tfachim high, and Dalid wide. So Tzarech Hin Va'alachson Olo. So we'll say, listen to this. So now that you're thinking about diagonals, so I understand if you have a post, right, or a pillar in the middle of Rishus Harabim, and it's 10 tfachim high, and it's 4 tfachim of area, 4 tfachim area. So Rabbi says, so that usually constitutes a Rishus HaYachid. So now are you telling me that in order for it to have a proper 4 tfachim of area, it actually has to have a diagonal of 5 3/5 tfachim? Lav Hainu Rav Chananya, the sign of Chananya, Omer Kazeyu, Kol Shov Se Shabbos. So we'll say, yes, this is in fact what Rav Chananya said. We'll say something really dramatic emerges, that in order for Allah a Rishus to have the dimensions of a Rishus HaYachid, so it has to have a height of 10 tfachim, and it has to be 4 by 4, which means that it must have a diagonal of 5 3/5 tfachim in order to go ahead and be a proper Rishus HaYachid. Interesting. V'zeu she'amru, ha'ani ma'ariv b'raglav, am Rabbi Meir anu ein lanu ela ani. So we'll say, so now we're going to come to one of the last dramatic machloksim in this Mishnah. So we'll say, so remember again, let me read you the Mishnah for just a moment because it's going to frame the rest of today's daf. So the Mishnah read, after the machlokis about square versus round, then it said, B'zoi sha'amru ha'ani ma'ariv b'raglav. This is what we learned when we said, or this is what we said, that an ani has the ability to establish a makom shvisa with his physical presence. Right? And as both say, an ani does not require food in order to establish a makom shvisa. All he needs is his physical presence. Let's read in the Mishnah now. Amar Rabbi Meir, anu ein lanu ela ani. So Rabbi Meir says, the ability to establish a makom shvisa with your physical presence and not requiring food is dafka adin by ani. Dafka din by ani. So the Gemara, I'm just finishing the Mishnah. Dafka adin by ani. Rabbi Huda omer echad ani ve'echad ashir. Rabbi Huda said, no. Anyone could establish a makom shvisa with their person, right? Whether you're rich, whether you're poor. So though amru ma'arvim bas el hakela ashir shelo yetzi v'arav. So also listen to this. Rabbi Huda says the reason they went ahead and they said that you could use food was to make things easier. Because also remember again, as we said before, if you're going ahead and you're making a makom shvisa with your person, you have to be there yourself. If you're making it with food, you could send that food with someone else. So I'll say, so fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir telling us that the ability to establish a makom shvisa with your physical presence is dafka adin for the ani, a rich person. We define rich person as a person who has food. Ultimately, again, cannot establish a makom shvisa with his physical presence. Rabbi Huda says, no, not true. Anyone could establish a makom shvisa with their physical presence. It's just that an ani, just that an usher, person who has food, could also do it with food to make his life a little bit easier. So here we go. Rav Nachman says as follows: Machlokes bimkomi. So we'll say the machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda is in the case of Mikomi. Now, what does it mean? Look at the last Rashi on the Daf. Machlokes bimkomi, Garcinon biyud machlokes Rayemer Rabbi Yehuda, Tekashari Rabbi Yehuda afilu lo asher la'ari beraglov, ba'omer shevisasi bimkomi. So let's listen to this. The machlokes is where the person says, let my makom shvisa be where I am right now. The Rabbi Meir savar ikar erev bepas. Rabbi Meir says, really an erev rabosai makom shvisa is established with bread. Amud beis. Anihuda kil rabbanan iluya. So Rabbi Meir will hold that it's dafka by a poor person that the rabbis were megel. Aval ashir lo. But an ashir rabosai cannot establish a present makom shvisa just with his physical presence. He requires food. Look at Rashi. Ani huda kil rabbanan gabe haba b'derech ve'eni mopas huda kil rabbanan gabe lo mar shisasim komi kisheino makir ilon agalis. Well, listen to this. It's very important. In this context, by the way, as we're going to see, ani doesn't just mean a poor person. Ani also means a traveler, because the assumption is that sometimes a traveler may not have full provisions with him. So Rabbi Meir says that ultimately, again, it's dafka an ani who is able to say, my makom shvisa should be here. And he's able to establish that with his person without food. Because Rabbi Meir holds that the ikar din of establishing a makom shvisa is really with food. It's just that the rabbis relaxed the standards for an ani. Rabbi Huda savar, no. Ikar erev beregel. Echadani ve'echadashir. Ultimately, Rabbi Huda says that's not true. Rabbi Huda says really the primary way to establish a makom shvisa is how? Your physical presence. Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah. So we have a fundamental yisodistic machlokes as to how you establish a makom shvisa. Rabbi Meir says the ikar way to establish a makom shvisa is how? Food. And it's just that the rabbis relaxed the standards for an ani/traveler. Rabbi Huda says, no, the ikar way to establish a makom shvisa is your physical presence. The rabbis just gave you an extra way to establish a makom shvisa with food, and the beauty of food is that you could dispatch it with someone else. Aval b'makom ploni, if you're talking about establishing a forward makom shvisa, in other words, where on Erev Shabbos I say, my makom shvisa should be, by the north side of the tree, which is within 2,000 amos of my current location. Aval b'makom ploni divrei hakol ani in ashir lo. Everyone agrees that what? That an ani could do this. Only an ani could establish a forward makom shvisa, and an ashir cannot. And I will say, very important to define our terms here. Ani in this context means a traveler. Ashir in this context means, Rashi says, someone who is sitting in his home. So I will say, this is actually quite fascinating. So according to this version of the Gemara, the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa, which I will say, if you think about it, is a real chiddush, right? So the idea that on Erev Shabbos, I could identify an area that is within 2,000 amos of my current location. And I can say that forward area should be my makom shvisa. The Gemara now is suggesting that everyone agrees that the only type of person who could avail himself of that ability is an ani. Ani defined not by someone who's poor, but ani defined as a traveler. But let's say, if I'm sitting in my house, and I say, you know what, I want my makom shvisa. It's Erev Shabbos. I just don't feel like leaving the house. My makom shvisa should be 1,500 amos here. That doesn't work. So an incredible qualification in a forward makom shvisa. V'zohi sha'amru, when the Mishnah said that phrase, v'zohi sha'amru, this is what they meant when they said, man katan, who is the opinion, who's the author of that? That's Rabbi Meir. V'haya, what is it referring to? V'haya kai, a'eno makir, o she'eno baki b'halacha. That's referring dafka to a case of someone who doesn't recognize a landmark, or is just not a baki in halacha. So the Gemara says, and when they said that you could use bread ultimately to make your eruv, that's a leniency. Whose opinion is that? That's Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say, so therefore again, in this version, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir are arguing on the ikar institution of eruv. Rabbi Meir says the ikar institution of eruv is bepas, is with bread. Rabbi Yehuda says it's beregel. And therefore the machlokes is who can go ahead and establish an eruv in a present place without bread. So Rabbi Meir says only an ani can do it without bread, but an ashir cannot. Rabbi Yehuda says anyone could establish a makom shvisa in a present location, whether with their person or with bread. But in this version, everyone agrees that the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa is only for a traveler. An ashir, meaning someone who is at home, relaxing at home, cannot establish a forward makom shvisa by simple verbal designation. Rav Chisda says no. Machlokes b'makom ploni. No, in fact, machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is not establishing a makom shvisa where you currently are, but rather their machlokes is establishing a forward makom shvisa. Did Rabbi Meir suffer ani in ashir lo? Rabbi Meir holds only a traveler could do it, but someone in their home cannot establish a forward makom shvisa. Rabbi Yehuda suffer echad ani ve'echad ashir. But Rabbi Yehuda holds that no, even establishing, this different version of machlokes, even establishing a forward makom shvisa, Rabbi Yehuda holds anyone could do that. Aval bimkomi. But I will say, if a person wants to establish a makom shvisa where he currently is, where he's currently standing now, just through his physical presence, the divrei hakol echad ani ve'echad ashir. Everyone agrees that I will say, whether a traveler or someone in his home has the ability to establish a makom shvisa where he currently stands. The ikar eruv beregel. Because we'll say in this version of the machlokes, both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda agree that the ikar of a eruv is your physical presence. I should say the ikar of a makom shvisa is your physical presence. So when the Mishnah says v'zohi sha'amru, when the Mishnah makes that statement, and this is what we said, man katani la, who is the author of that? Rabbi Meir. Vahi akai, and what is it referring to? The Gemara says, aha misheba baderech v'chashchalo. So it refers to the case of someone who's traveling and it gets dark. And when they said that using bread or using food to create a makom shvisa is a kula, whose opinion is that? Divrei hakol. Ultimately, again, that represents everyone's opinion. So we'll say, fundamental machlokes in the machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Tanya Kaval said Rav Nachman. So we'll say there's a bright that supports Rav Nachman's interpretation of this machlokes. Echad ani ve'echad ashir ma'arvin bepas. Whether you're an ani or whether you're an ashir, you have the ability to establish a makom shvisa with bread. V'lo yatsa ashir chutz, v'lo yetzi ashir chutz l'tchum, v'yomar shvisasi b'makom ploni. Lefish, so let's listen to this. Now, the wording over here, Rash, according to Rash, is a little bit misleading, because it sounds like an ashir shouldn't go out of the tchum. Obviously, no one should go out of the tchum. What it means like this, supposed to say that an ashir shouldn't go to the edge of his tchum, of his present tchum. V'yomar shvisasi b'mkomi. And say that halacha l'maisa makom shvisa should be where I stand now. Why? Lefi shelo amru ma'arvin beregel ela lemisha ba b'derech v'chashcha divrei Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir holds that the ability to establish a makom shvisa, this is Rav Nachman's version, the ability to establish a makom shvisa with your physical presence is dafka din in a traveler, not a din in an ashir. According to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Huda Omer echad ani ve'echad ashir ma'arvin beregel. Rabbi Huda says anyone has the ability to establish a makom shvisa with their physical presence, and therefore v'yetze ashir chutz l'tchum v'yomar tehei shvisasi bimkomi. Rabbi Yehuda says therefore, both say even an ashir has the ability to go to the edge of his tchum erev Shabbos and to say I am establishing my new makom shvisa just with my physical presence. V'zohi ikaro shel eruv. And Rabbi Yehuda says because the ikar of an eruv, which means the ikar of establishing a physical domicile, right, the makom shvisa, is your physical presence. Bread, ve'tiru chachamim lebalabayis, l'shalech eruva biad avdo, biad bino, biad shlucho, bishvil lahakel alav. And I both say, Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, the entire ikar of a makom shvisa is your physical presence. You know, I both say the most lechatchiladik way to make a domicile, to make a makom shvisa is how you show up. It's only that the Rabbanan were mekel and allowed you to use bread, allowed you to go ahead and use mazon-based sudos, right? Enough food for 2 meals. And this way I will say, what does that allow you to do? That allows you to send the eruv in the hand of someone else. So you don't have to travel yourself. Rabbi Yehuda says that's a kula. But the ikar of eruv is mamish, the ability to establish a domicile through your physical presence. The Gemara tells a story. I'm Rabbi Yehuda. I'll give you a raya to this. Ma'isa ba'anshe beis mamal u'ba'anshe beis gurion ba'aruma. Shay mechalkin grogos v'tzimukin la'aniye b'sheni b'tzuras. Let's listen to this. There was a story of the people of Beis Mamal and Beis Gurion who were assembled in the city of Aruma, right? Not the cafe chain, right? But this was the name of the city. And I will say they were handing out grogros are dried figs, tzimukin are raisins to the poor during years of famine. And what happened? Uboy anye kfar sichin va'anye kfar chananya umachshichin alatchum L'macharas mashkim u'bayin. And I will say, what happened? And the people came along, right? The poor people of Kfar Sichin and the poor people of Kfar Chananya came along, and they waited by the edge of the Tchum, or they established a Makom Shvisa by the edge of the Tchum. And that way, the next day, they were able to come and get the produce, get the figs and the grapes and the raisins. If you look at Rashi, I'll say, so Rashi says, and this is in the wide lines, 2, 4, 6, 8 lines down in the wide lines. So Rashi says over here, Aniyei Kfar Sichin, Smuchin la'aroma b'soch dal apayim. So let's listen to this. So the people of Kfar Sichin were within 4,000 amas of the city of Aroma. So we'll say, so therefore again, they couldn't get there in the regular Tchum. So what did they do? Erev Shabbos, they went to a place within the 2,000 amas of where they currently were. They established a new Makom Shvisa, and on Shabbos they traveled to Aroma. So Rashi says, what do you see from here? Umachshichin ala Tchum, Alma, Iker Erev Beregel. So we'll see from here that halacha l'maisa, the primary way to establish an Erev is with your physical presence. This is Rabbi Yehuda's Shita. Rabbi Yehuda's Shita is supposed to say that the essence of establishing a Dam, so what you're supposed to say, really is intuitive. It's really intuitive that obviously wherever you are, that is quote unquote your home. So therefore, the ikar way to establish Makom Shvisa is your physical presence. The use of food simply represents a kula. Amr Avashi Maslisin Namideka, Bryce that supports this as well. Diktani Mishi Yatzalelech Liir Shema Arvin Ba. So we'll say if you're setting out to a city that has its own Erev, Vechziru Chavero, and I will say what happens, your friend turned you around. Now look at Rashi. Mishi Yatza. Rashi says over here, Mishi Yatza Kol Duhu Vehechzik Baderech Liir Shema Arvin Shesmucha Liiro L'Sof Dalal Apayim. Right, v'yachal adam leilech mizuluzu ayedei. Supposed to watch this. So I set out to a city that is within 4,000 amas of my current location. So right, I'm setting out to Erev, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to set out to Erev Shabbos. I'm going to establish a new Makom Shvisa, which will put me within 2,000 amas of my intended destination. So, but as I'm going, v'chziru chavero, my friend goes in and tells me to turn around. Why? Rashi says it's too hot, it's too cold, it's not a good time to travel. So what's the halacha? Hu muter leilech v'chol b'nei ha'ir asrun divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say, I am permitted to go. Now look at Rashi. Hu muter leilech lemachar la'ose ir acheres v'chol b'nei iro asrun. So we'll say the next day, I am permitted to go ahead and travel to that new city, but the other residents of my city are not permitted to go. Dear Rabbi Yehuda, V'avinaba, the Gemara says, I don't understand, why am I permitted to go? V'avinaba, Ma'ishna ihu, u'ma'ishna inu. Why am I permitted to go to city B, but the rest of the residents of my city A are not permitted to? Rav Huna HaChamay, what's the case? Kegon sheyesh lo shnei batim u'shnei techumei Shabbos beineihem. Rabbi say the case is where I have 2 homes, 1 home in each city, and each home has its own tchum. The Gemara says, ihu, kevan denafkele la'archa havele ani, v'hanach ashiram ninhu. Because Rabbi say, as soon as I set out, I am like an ani who is traveling, and therefore I establish a makom shvisa with my person. Everyone else in my city is considered to be like an ashir. So because they're an ashir, ultimately again, they do not get a new tchum, a forward tchum, or a forward makom shvisa, by simply sitting in their home. Alma, kol b'makom ploni, ani in, ashir lo shmamina. So both say, so again, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, when it comes to the establishment of a forward tchum or a forward makom shisa, only an ani, and both in this context, ani being defined as a traveler has the ability to do so, but someone sitting in his home does not. Masni la Rav Chia bar Ashi l'Chia bar Rav kamei Rav Acha kamei Rav echad ani ve'echad ashir. So you know what actually? Yeah, fine. Let's finish it. So Masni la Rav Chia bar Ashi l'Chia bar Rav kamei Rav. Echad ani ve'echad ashir. So we'll say a different version. You know, whether you're an ani or you're an ashir, you have the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa. Amr le Rav siyim banami halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say we establish halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say, so we'll have to see. Maybe we'll start with halacha l'maisa just for a moment now. But we'll say what comes out of here is as follows: a couple of fascinating machloksim. So we'll say, so first of all, a fundamental machlokis in what is the ikra of eruv. Is the ikra of eruv ultimately, or I should say, when I say ikra of eruv, I mean ikra of makom shvisa. Is the ikra makom shvisa ultimately again your person, or is it your food? So that's a machlokes. That's a machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda. Second machlokes Rabbi say is, ultimately the establishment of a forward makom shivisa. Who has the ability to establish a forward makom shivisa? Is that a din? Dafka in a traveler, which again, remember, when it comes to traveler, the Gemara is calling that an ani. Is that a din in the ani? Or ultimately, again, is that a din in any person? That seems to be a machlokes again. Rabbi Huda ultimately telling us, that the one opinion telling us, we'll see who's who. One opinion telling us that no, the din of a forward makom shvis is dafka a din in a traveler. But if you are an ani, but if you're an ashir is defined as what? Someone who is at home, you cannot establish a forward makom shvisa just through articulating an intent. But Lamaisa, other opinions saying no, the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa applies to anyone and everyone. Again, going back to yesterday's daf, provided that's what? You can articulate and identify a specific area. So we'll stop over here for today. I think what we'll do is Emeretz Hashem tomorrow. We'll pick up with the halacha l'maisa and Emeretz Hashem close out this sugya as we begin the new Mishnah. Shkach